Okay, guys, we are powering through on this podcast. I'm trying to get as many videos out of the way as possible because I got a busy weekend coming up. And yeah, we are watching this podcast, and it's from a behavior clinic. And I say behavior clinic specifically because if you have not seen videos 1 and 2, which I wouldn't know why you click on this video, go back and watch 1 and 2, and you'll understand why I'm doing this. But we have to make sure that we don't say the no words on YouTube, and YouTube might even restrict this video anyways. I don't know, but here are some of the no words, and here is what we are going to be using instead. If you see this word, I'm going to say behaviors, okay? Even the name of this podcast and the clinic they come from has the no word in it, and I'm going to say behavior clinic as a substitute. If you see this word, I'm just going to spell it out and say DIET. Okay. Typically, YouTube does not care if I say DIET, but in this context, they're like, we've heard too many similar things put together, and the AI doesn't like it, and so therefore you restrict the podcast. And this gets restricted anyways. Whatever. No, I just did all for naught. But I'm doing my best, guys. I want you to see it because I feel like it's very important. This podcast was recommended to me by one of my viewers. I put their thing up here right now so you can see it. Blah blah blah. And yes, so they have great comments, and they recommend this to me because they have the assertion that we thought fat acceptance was a societal thing as it was created organically through social media and people be able to find themselves, and it's just kind of been circulating and growing in that way. But as I said, the assertion is it's actually a top-down phenomenon, and it's being pushed by the behavior clinic. And this very, very widespread behavior clinic that is around the country. All the people who are in fat acceptance claim to have behaviors. They're typically saying it's the reducing behavior, but as we all know, it is very likely the excess behavior. And they're going back and forth because that is what the behavior does. But they're obviously doing the excess behavior because that's why they're fat in the first place. But this podcast is having Aubrey Gordon on, and they're talking about how fat can be healthy. They're talking about how it's more about the social stigma that is the problem and not the actual weight that's the problem. And they won't even acknowledge that the weight is the problem. They'll acknowledge that these behaviors you have to do to gain the weight is real, but they won't make the connection that it's the behavior that's the problem that's causing the weight. It's very, very strange talking around the reality of the situation. And the fact that this podcast is going along with everything that Aubrey Gordon is saying, and the person that's on there with her, is very, very concerning because they're supposed to be helping people with their health. And we looked at the website at the last episode, and yeah, it was at the very end of the podcast, guys. If you didn't see it, go back to the end of the podcast and go watch it. I'll just pull it up right now. Yeah, they say they're the leader in these behavior treatments, and yet they're pushing at the same time you don't actually have to lose weight. And they're probably doing that because it's a lot of people who have recovered from one side of the spectrum now talking to people who are larger and saying you can stand that side of the spectrum. And just guys, that's just not how health works. We have focused so hard on the feelings aspect of being fat that we have completely gone off the deep end and are ignoring the reality of the health aspect of being fat. So yeah, let's jump back into it. See how much of this podcast I can finish. I don't know if I'm going to finish it in this episode or it'll be another episode. We'll just have to wait and see.
And I should probably clarify for our listeners what the AAP is. And so it's the Academy of American Pediatrics, meaning the governing body of who decides what the best practice is for pediatric care. So in the last, 7 months ago, came out with a more anti-fat, very and medication approach to weight loss. So Cara and Aubrey, when did you in your childhood or teen or early adult journey start to question the messages you were getting that you must be thin, you must change your body to fit into a different mold and to be accepted?
I would say for me, my first girlfriend was like a fat activist adjacent sort of lady. And she would take me to see things like there was a radical fat cheerleading troupe in Portland, and she'd be like, we're going to see the fat cheerleaders, we're going to go do this, and we're going to read these books, and we're going to and all of that sort of stuff. And it was too soon for me, and it made me really uncomfortable. And then a couple of years later, I think my own sort of and relationship to just reached a breaking point, and I just decided to sort of give myself a break, quote unquote, from to just be like, I'm just gonna not worry about that for like a little bit, and a little bit turned into a long bit. And I think the sort of nail in the coffin, in as much as that exists for folks, right? Because sort of culture and anti-fatness are still all around us all the time. So it's not like we get to just sort of step out of it. But the closest I get to a nail in the coffin was actually starting to research and anti-fatness and sort of treatment of fat people and all of that kind of stuff, because as soon as you start looking into it, it all just falls apart really quickly, right?
What falls apart really quickly? Does health fall apart really quickly? Because she talked about the treatment of fat people, the anti-fatness. So she talked about the societal stigma parts of it. They talk about the feelings parts of it. None of that negates the health part of it. They're always trying to conflate the two things. Just because your feelings are hurt doesn't mean that the facts are wrong. That was a very strange story to get to that point. Let's see what else she has to say.
As soon as you start looking for, say, primary source studies in peer-reviewed journals about like what delivers weight loss for most people in the long term most of the time, doesn't exist, buddy. They got nothing. They're coming up blank, right? As soon as you start looking into what are the effects of discrimination on fat people and like what are some solutions to that, again, like a lot of things start to snap into focus. You start to see that actually when people experience discrimination, their blood pressure goes up. Oh, interesting.
Oh, I really love it when FA people love to bring up science and they present it like they know anything about it. I said this like 3 times this week in videos, but you can't do proper like studies on people when it comes to weight loss because you can't put people in cages. So it's very difficult to show what is working when it comes to weight loss, especially if you are recruiting people for your studies that engage in some of these excess behaviors, right? And especially because those excess behavior type people, one of the key components of it is lying. It's lying about how much you're eating. And so at the end of the day, it's very difficult to show this is long-term weight loss because you just literally cannot capture a person and keep them in a room for 10 years and say, eat only this. That is just, it's an impossible standard to meet when it comes to scientific studies. Now, what we can show are short-term studies. We're saying if we do a reduction in how much you are eating, yeah, weight loss does occur. And so we are taking that and extrapolating it to long-term scenarios. And yes, things may increase or decrease in difficulty in that long-term scenario. But once again, what it cannot show is how it is impacted by these mental behaviors that are causing one to EAT in excess. And so they will grasp for this thing of like, ooh, look, the science can't show it, but not actually talk about the reality of science. But there's definitely nothing wrong with all the research that they're presenting on their side, right? Especially when it comes to like that behavioral research of this is how people are affected, you know, when blood pressure rises and feelings are hurt, et cetera, when facing discrimination. Sure, yeah, discrimination is terrible. Nobody should be doing it. And you definitely shouldn't be using discrimination of others, like people who are gay and people who are, you know, different skin color than you are, to then make an excuse for yourself in your condition. You know, we can talk about that again. But one thing I would like to see, does that study ever talk about your blood pressure goes up because you're being discriminated against because you're fat, but maybe the reason why you have dangerous blood pressure to begin with is because you're fat? That could be related.
Interesting, and a thing that maybe we should consider when we're talking about hypertension and fat people, right? That there is just like all of that sort of information that I thought would cut against me as a fat person, because that's how we talk about this stuff, as we sort of mobilize science as a way of silencing fat people. As I dug into it, I found that it was like quite the opposite, right? And that quite a bit of the data actually cut in fat folks' favor and was sort of like in defense of fat people in some pretty big ways. And that felt really, really helpful to me.
Yeah. And I think for me, maybe this generation is going to learn sooner, but for me, it was definitely wildly into adulthood. I mean, even solidly into my 30s, because that's when, you know, I was about to turn 30. I was about to turn 30. That's what it was when I started to get these adventure travel catalogs in the mail, and I realized that I kept saying to myself that I'm going to do that when I lose weight. Like I'd see these pictures of Machu Picchu, Kilimanjaro, and the Alps, and I realized that everything was followed by that clause. Like I'll get some new clothes when I lose weight. I'll see the doctors when I lose weight. I'll go on this adventure when I lose weight. And that's that moment of getting an adventure travel catalog and realizing like, whoa, wait a minute. What if I just went on a hike here in New Jersey and, you know, like it's a tiny one. That's okay. What if I started to take up some space in the places I really want to be in and I want to explore? And so that was really the first step.
I don't think anything she said there was wrong. That's one thing I always advocate for. You have to go out and live your life as a fat person because you need to see why life is worth living and how much easier it can be if you lose weight. Now, she clearly climbed a mountain while 300 something pounds. So did I. I climbed several mountains, 300 something pounds. I got 3/4 of the way of Fuji, and then I had to go back down because I did not know I had asthma. Okay. As soon as I got back to the US, they diagnosed me with asthma. They're like, oh, yeah, you tried to climb Fuji, which is like higher elevation with asthma. Yeah, I did. But I did manage to successfully climb other mountains that were not as high of elevation. And it was brutal. And am I going to keep hiking while I can? Yeah, I'm going to keep hiking in a very safe way I can with my, limb issue. Hopefully I won't like dislocate a leg on a hike. But I don't think she understands that just because she did that and just because I could do something like that, she climbed Kilimanjaro and I climbed a few small mountains in Japan, that everybody is capable of doing that. And also, if you're 300 pounds, you could have a higher muscle distribution than fat distribution as well. Like I had a very high muscle distribution because I was doing things like hiking, right? And I was extremely active. But there's a lot of people who weighed exactly the same amount as I did, 347 pounds, and they did not have a higher muscle distribution. More than half my body was muscle. I've lost muscle since then because as you're losing weight and you don't need that muscle, it's, you've lost fat, your muscle doesn't have to sustain itself to carry all that fat around. That happens. You can definitely have a lot of muscle on you as you're fat. But a lot of people are the other end of fat where they have significantly more fat on their bodies because they're not as active, because they're extremely sedentary. And so maybe someone like her, and like all those blood tests are true because she is so active that she is by default healthier. What applies to her does not apply to the person who is fat because they're sitting on the couch. And it's a stereotype, but it's a stereotype for a reason, okay? There's active fatties and then there's non-active fatties, and we should not conflate the two.
But I do, culture kind of has this way of kind of the only thing I can envision right now is like the waves of a sea, like you're riding on a boat in the sea, and sometimes you're in control of the tide and sometimes the tide can kind of pull you back in. And so it's been a journey back and forth. But I do remember a doctor that I had who was very, just non-judgmental of me. And I think I was asking for something. I don't know if it was a pill, a program, prescription of some kind, and she just said to me, like, listen, Cara, I've seen you for like 8 years and your weight has always been around this number and you're okay. Like all the numbers that I care about are great. So why, I don't know much about this, whatever it was I was asking about, but I do know this about your body and I think you're okay.
I don't think that's a good doctor. Sorry to say, I don't think that's a good doctor. I think there was a better way of saying it. I don't even know if that's exactly what the doctor said or if that's the way she interpreted it, because clearly you're not going to be okay. Like, let's check in with you in 30 years and see how okay you are.
And so that was one of those like moments that like, my gosh, maybe I am. And so there are lots of stops on that journey of just trying to figure out like, maybe I don't need diet culture or thinness in my life to exist and do the things that I really want to do.
Well, I appreciate both of your perspectives and the analogy you brought of like the tide where you get pulled out back in. It's the journey is not linear at all. And yeah, you all are here and you're such advocates for inclusion and really speaking up and providing education. So I'm wondering in your own personal journeys, like what are you aiming for? Like, what impact do you hope that you could have on this space?
That's a big question. Cara, I don't know if you have an answer ready to go.
All right. Well, we'll have to like divide the task in half and you take part of it and I'll like, okay,
Great.
you do that part
Love
and I'll
it.
do this.
Excellent.
Because it's a huge question. It's a huge ask because there is so much work to be done in this space, from weight, not being a protected class, weight discrimination. It's not, there's so much work to be done from the discrimination point of view. But where my skill set is and where my expertise is helping to change the narrative and the imagery and the perception for folks that, all bodies are welcome in spaces, and whether that's the fitness space, the travel space, the apparel space, like helping companies articulate that better and understand not only the moral case for it, but the business case for it. Because
Okay, let's talk about how bodies are able to access these spaces. Can a fat person go on a plane? Yes, you can. You might have to buy 2 seats, but you can go on a plane. Can a fat person buy clothing? Yes, you can. Is it always readily available to every store you go to? No, it isn't. But why is that? That's because the market is what is responsible for what is available. There's not many of you, okay? If you're over a 3X, there's not many of you. And so you're going to have to go to Torrid. If you're larger than a 6X, what Torrid carries up until, you're going to have to go somewhere else. And that's just the fact of the matter, but it becomes extremely rare. Why should a store carry a 7X plus if hardly anyone's going to buy from it, or even beyond a 3X, right? If hardly anybody's going to buy from it. I think the highest I typically see at stores is a 2X. The market is the predictor for what is going to be available. And you're asking these companies to take a hit in order to, into what? Like make you clothing? Okay, let's talk about places where I've been excluded as a fat person. I talked about this before, but I was not allowed on a ride at Hogwarts, or was it Harry Potter Land and Universal, the Wizarding World, whatever, because I was too big. It was very embarrassing too. It was at the Universal Studios Japan, that one, and I was just like, I'm just gonna go on this roller coaster, even though I hate roller coasters, because it was like the experience, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll do it. I was standing in line, and she said, "Can you just like this lady come through? She's like, can you just like come with me for a second, and can you like sit here? Can you like pull it down, like the seat thing?" And it pulled down a little bit, but like it did, obviously my belly was just like a little bit too big. Or my butt was too big. My butt was too big and it was pushing me forward, and it couldn't pull the seatbelt down. And it was the example one to see if you could fit on the ride. And every Japanese person there turned around and stared at me because they have no shame about that kind of stuff there. And she's like, yeah, I recommend, you can't go on this ride. It's just, you won't fit. And she was just being very nice. She was speaking English too. Her English was really good. But, and she's like, I recommend you go on this ride over here. This one, you can just walk through it. And I was just like, horrendously embarrassed. I did not have access to the space, guys. I didn't have access. They should just put me on the roller coaster and the seatbelt wouldn't fit and then I would fall out and die, right? I refute her claims there about not having access to these spaces. No, it's not having access to in the way that you would like. But when you are, if you're choosing to be in a larger body, so to speak, consequences will come with that. But they will acknowledge that this is a choice. At the end of the day, it is a choice. It may be a very long, hard choice to get out of, but it's still a choice. You can't make it work overnight, but my goodness, you can make it work over a few years.
Because in the work that I do through the Gorgeous Agency, I mean, 67% of US women are size 14 and above. So like, why are only 12% of garments made in plus sizes? Like,
and do you think that's a good thing? You think it's a good thing that 47% of women are above a 14? Let's do another take on why the market might be making so much smaller clothing for people, but not have it be as needed, right? So if you're eating a lot of food, are you spending more money on that food? It's likely. It's likely you're spending more money on that food. That money that you're spending on that food to eat in excess, so if you're having double the amount that you need, that's double the amount of money that you're paying for food. That's less money you have to put towards buying plus size clothing. As somebody who's having less food because they're eating a normal diet and they're of a healthy weight has more money to spend on extraneous things like more clothing. It's not a market predictor. It's basic economics, which is why they're always talking about capitalism and stuff on here, because they don't like the fact that this is the way that capitalism operates. It's if it's a free market operation, it's saying we will provide what the demand is. You are choosing to put your money towards food that you don't need. It's food that you don't need, and not towards things that you would like, which is excess clothing, which oftentimes you don't need that much clothing, okay? You just need a few outfits. That's about it. I know it sucks if you're a woman and you want to be stylish. Thank goodness I can afford Torrid. They're not cheap. They got sales all the time. I definitely play those sales up. But that's just the fact of the matter. That's the way that the world operates. But no, they would so much rather. They would rather launch an entire campaign to like take down things such as capitalism, like just completely do a socialist revolution rather than admit that maybe it's their own behaviors that's the problem.
The math right now does not add up. And so that's where I'm focusing my effort, because that's where my skill set really is. So, and of course, to continue telling my story about climbing Kilimanjaro and having that platform and just being a role model so that other people's adventures can feel like a reality. And believe me, not everybody wants to climb Kilimanjaro 8 days without a shower. It's just really not for everybody. But
It's not for me, I'll tell you that.
but who knows what someone else's Kilimanjaro will be, right? Who knows what, I mean, is it walking around the block and not being terrified that some dimwit or somebody, somebody like a middle schooler is going to yell something out of car, or like, or even it doesn't even have to be a middle schooler. It could be just a regular adult human being. It feels permission to like yell out something ridiculous when someone's taking a walk. So if my platform, my story, the things that I do in the adventure space helps someone else to make a decision to do something that brings them joyful movement or joyful feelings, then my work is not done, but it's working.
It's impactful.
That's a good answer. You had a good answer, right?
Now you do the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cara noted it is perfectly legal in 48 states to fire someone or deny them housing or deny them a table in a restaurant or a room in a hotel just because you think they're too fat, right? We have a long way to go. It is perfectly legal for doctors in many states to deny care to fat people because they think they're too fat.
Well, I should talk about hotels. Hotels can refuse you for being too big. Maybe your size will impact the structural integrity of the beds that they're providing. So you're costing them more money than you're paying them in order to stay at this hotel. When it comes to work, a lot of states are at-will employment states, meaning they can fire you for any reason. So yeah, technically they could fire you for being fat. They could fire you for literally any reason. They don't have to say. And so she's, I think, lumping those states into that because a lot of states are that way. Now, restaurants definitely can refuse you if they don't think you're going to fit into the chairs. They have like wicker chairs and they're like, well, you're not going to fit, you're going to break our chair. So you're telling the restaurant that they have to provide stronger chairs because they were anticipating you. That doesn't make sense. And also they can refuse you oftentimes in restaurants for like anything. You know, we have this idea the customer is always right. That's not actually true. It's weird boomer logic. It's unfortunately carried down into other generations and we're still perpetuating it. And now it's millennial logic. But the customer is not always right. The restaurant does have a right to refuse you for any reason, including being fat. It's not exclusively being fat. And she's presenting it this way because she knows that the people who are listening to her, the people who need to be reinforced by this narrative, are not going to look into it and see, oh, it's not just about being fat. It's like a lot of things,
That there's a lot of work to do there. There are issues in doctors' offices about the equipment that they have. Do they have exam tables that will hold fat people? Do they have scales that will measure us if they're going to insist on weighing us? Do they even have equipment that will weigh us, right? There is an issue with blood pressure cuffs. A lot of folks don't necessarily know this, that most blood pressure cuffs are built around the idea of a thin person's arm. So they are sort of cylindrical. If a cylindrical cuff is put on a fat person, it will give them an artificially high reading on their blood pressure. There is another kind, which is a conical cuff, which makes space for fat people's arms. They can be used on thin people with perfect accuracy. So great. And they're accurate on fat people, but those are not as common as the cylindrical ones, right? So there are just like all of these things that we can do in schools, having seats that are attached to desks.
Okay, so when it comes to blood pressure cuffs, she is right there that a lot of the blood pressure cuffs don't give accurate readings, and they don't give accurate readings because it's attached to a machine and it's doing an automatic reading, and those things are inaccurate just to begin with, and they're horrifically painful. And because they have that cuff and that cuff is attached to the machine, oftentimes it's standardized and it's a complete total bulk. My doctor's office exclusively does manual readings. Every single nurse, every single doctor has to know how to do a manual blood pressure read, okay? And those ones are significantly more accurate, okay? And they're significantly less painful too, because it is painful to get your blood pressure taken. And so ever since they switched to doing those, my blood pressure always comes out normal. It's like low normal. So yeah, I will give her that. Blood pressure cuffs are complete and total BS. The seats with desks attached, kind of BS too. I don't think for a size reason. I just think for an uncomfortable reason, not even just to the size. And we're like nothing to lean on, right? Terrible.
At a fixed width, right? Like there are things that all of us can do from wherever we are with whatever power we have to functionally make the world more welcoming to fat people. And that doesn't stop at not using slurs or not being the person who yells at somebody when they're on a walk, right? To Cara's point. I think there are sort of two other effects that I hope to have for folks. One is exposing the scaffolding that has sort of been the source code for a lot of our deepest sort of anti-fat beliefs. We have been told that those are hard and fast science, and often they are the furthest thing from hard and fast science, right? That feels really important to me, that folks start to think of the industry like they think of big tobacco, like they think of vaping companies, like they think of the worst players in our economy, because I think the industry is one of the worst players in our economy, one of the most disingenuous, and one of the most profit hungry and all kinds of stuff, right? And then I think the last thing for me that feels really important is anytime we're talking about structural issues of inequality, anytime we're talking about systems of oppression and marginalization, we sort of have this conversation that's like, man, some people out there somewhere are really mean to fat people, and I don't know who they are, but they should knock it off, right? In this way that is completely absolving ourselves of any role of upholding those same systems. So
when she says structural systems of oppression, she means capitalism, which is why she was talking about her issues with the market. She didn't say market, but that's what she was talking about. She doesn't understand why people can't make equitable, right? Equitable, not equal opportunity. What can make equitable? Bring it down here, exceptions for people who are her size. She didn't say this, but she's thinking, why do they pay 2 times for this outfit that the thin person did? Because they use more material. It's basically as simple as that. So yeah, she's bringing the systematic capitalism side into her argument. She's bringing in the whole diet industry. She's talking about how, the diet industry is creating this narrative. And once again, market is not top down. Market is bottom up. The diet industry exists because there's a lot of fat people. The diet industry did not make the fat people. The diet industry did not create the idea that being fat is unhealthy. All these things popped up because of the base demand.
The other impact that I hope to have through this work, and question mark on effectiveness, we'll see, is getting folks to understand that in big ways and small ways, all of us are capable of being sort of the villain in that story, just as much as we're all capable of being the target of villainy in that story, right? That we're much more likely to hang on to our stories of how we were hurt by anti-fatness than by acknowledging when we have been part of upholding anti-fatness and working on that. And that's true for fat people about people who are fatter than us. It's true of thin people, right? Sort of regardless of size, all of us are capable of anti-fatness. And that feels like a really, really important message for folks to get, to stop looking outward for find the fat phobe, right? And start looking inward to, wait a minute, where do my practices not totally match up to my values? Where might I have done this without blame and shame? Because that's not really helping, right? But just doing sort of an honest inventory of where can I show up differently and in a stronger way for fat people feels like a really important set of questions that I would love for people to spend a little time doing a little soul searching on.
Okay, guys, we are going to end part 3 there, and it's gone on for a while. This video is going to be a TCH edit. Yeah, she would definitely call me one of those fat phobes because I'm calling her out on this information. But yeah, she is completely dedicated to restructuring society around her delusion. That much is clear. And unfortunately, she has one of the largest behavioral clinics in the country on her side, reinforcing this, teaching people in a medical setting that you can be fat and healthy at the same time. And it's weird because they will acknowledge when you've gone too far on the other end of the spectrum, you don't have enough weight on you. That's unhealthy. You have to gain weight. But they don't seem to understand that there is a limit on this side of the spectrum. Well, guys, I'll catch you in part 4. Hopefully I can get that done tonight. I am exhausted, okay? But this is so interesting. I want to keep on watching. And yeah, you're going to see me in this same outfit for several videos. Yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.